Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar. We'll just give everyone a few more minutes and then we'll get started. All right. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining the third webinar in our deep dive series, Working Efficiently with Supercharged Diagramming. My name is Anne Breen, and I'm a marketing consultant here at Modern Requirements, as well as your host for today. Our speakers for today include Bob Savelson, who is our SVP of Sales and Marketing. He's going to provide us with a quick introduction to Modern Requirements for DevOps, followed by Asif Sharif, our Chief Technologist, who will run through a detailed demo of our diagramming capabilities. At the end, we'll leave about 15 minutes for a Q&A. On that note, if you do have any questions, please drop them in the question window on the right-hand side, and we'll try to cover them either during or at the end of the presentation. After the webinar, if you are interested in receiving a free 30-day trial of Modern Requirements, please visit the link on the screen at modernrequirements.com/try-now. For those of you who don't know, we are on our third webinar of the deep dive series. The next webinar will be on the topic of using requirements as an enterprise asset, a discussion on reuse, which will be held on May 20th at 11 a.m. Just a few housekeeping things. After this webinar wraps, we will send an email with the video recording as well as a link to this upcoming webinar, so be sure to register if this topic is of interest to you. Just quickly before I pass it over to Bob, we have also included a quick feedback survey, which will appear once this webinar has ended and in the follow-up email a few hours from now. Your feedback is extremely important to us and really helps us improve these webinars going forward, so please feel free to fill those out. All right, over to you, Bob.
Thanks, Embreen. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. For those of you that aren't familiar with our company, Modern Requirements, we've been in business now for over 20 years and have developed a very deep relationship with Microsoft for over half of that time because our solution is in fact an extension of Microsoft Azure DevOps platform. Modern Requirements for DevOps can be deployed in the cloud as a SaaS solution or on-premise. And it is browser-based, which means there's no need to install anything on the local user's machine. We support single sign-in using your Azure DevOps credentials in the tool. And the tool simply inherits whatever process template you're using, whether it's Agile, Scrum, or BA Bach in Azure DevOps. And if you have other applications in your DevOps ecosystem that you would like to synchronize with your requirements information, we do sell and support SyncBridge software that connects to dozens of other applications that may be relevant for you. So today's topic is on diagramming. And diagrams are used by many of our clients to really enhance their requirements today. Rather than having standalone information in textual requirements, models, and test cases, our clients like to link all of those together and provide a much more integrated view of the requirements. And that provides much better context for the people that are consuming those requirements up and downstream, like stakeholders who would approve them, and having a picture is like 1,000 words, of course. The developers who create the products that you're building, having models to understand the flow of information through the product development is very helpful. And testers who need to verify that the product does exactly what it was designed to do, generally use models to calculate the paths. So having all of that information together in one place really helps to consume the information and ultimately contributes to a significant reduction in rework. Now, diagrams can be used in virtually any type of requirements approach, and they can be used at various stages of your requirements elicitation. To start with, you can create a flow of how you see the product working in the tool, and then drive requirements from each of the elements within that flow. Or alternatively, some of our clients already have the textual requirements and want to create a diagram to link to them. So they can be used at various stages, and certainly in an agile approach, they can be used at the strategy and initiative development, and maybe for detailed design in the delivery development as well. So lots of different approaches to how diagrams can be used, and we'll show you specifically how they work in our tool as we move through the presentation. Now, this is a screenshot of the diagram module, and our module supports many different types of diagrams, including UML diagrams. And I'm also highlighting here our Discover panel that some of the people on the call might know about, but there is an on-off button within our tool for the Discover panel. And in each module, it takes you through the key usage scenarios that the module supports. So there are 7 that are shown here in the Discover panel of diagram. And as is also shown at the bottom of this Discover panel, we have worked with the IIBA to create the BA BOK and BA BOK Agile templates. And diagramming is key within some of the techniques that the IIBA has included in the BA BOK version 3. So diagramming is one of the 3 visualization capabilities in modern requirements, with the other 2 being wireframes, mockups, or simulations, and use case creation. And there are many other capabilities in the tool, as this slide shows, and we have covered Smart Docs and review management in the previous 2 deep dive sessions that we've had that are available today for your viewing under the Help Center on our website. And because the tool is very broad and deep in functionality, it offers points of value to quite a variety of different stakeholders in your product development process. And certainly requirements engineers, QA staff, as well as designers and architects can leverage the diagramming capability that we're going to cover in the messaging today. So that's the end of my introduction. I will pass this over now to Asif, and he will demonstrate how diagramming works.
All right, thank you, Bob. So what we are going to do is talk about diagramming. And in talking about diagramming, here are the things I'm going to do. So hopefully you can see my diagram on the screen that I've shared. And so what we'll do is we'll first take a look at some pre-existing diagrams. And then we'll take a look at, we'll build some diagrams. I'll show you some of the key things you should know about it. But creating a diagram, hopefully you guys already know how to create diagrams. And so whether you're using Visio or whatever the case may be, so you can create diagrams with that. And really to then get into what can you do beyond creating a pretty picture. And of course, these pretty pictures of diagramming are very useful because it communicates very effectively, especially to people that are more visual. And I think most people are visual. They could take a look at a picture and they can extrapolate a lot of things. Whereas if you read a paragraph or a page or 10 pages, often the whole picture doesn't come together. So that's how I think we visualize in our own minds. So the diagram could be very useful. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to actually ask two polling questions to understand the audience on this call. And so please answer these questions. So the first question you have is about what's your job role? Are you a business systems analyst or product owner? We sort of put all of that in a single bucket. Are you a developer, an architect? Do you play a project management like role and others? We didn't want to create a big list. And so it looks like about 2/3 are business systems analysts, and there's an equal distribution amongst the other roles. So that's the response we have gotten. And now let's do the next question, which is what tools do you currently use for diagramming? So we have, it would appear that we have about the lion's share of the people use Visio. Some people use Modern Requirements by itself or with Visio. There's 20% that use other products, and 6% of the audience do not do diagramming right now. All right, perfect. Thank you, folks. All right, so let's take a look at the different types of diagrams you can create in Modern Requirements. Obviously, this is Azure DevOps, and everything from Smart Docs here to reporting are all capabilities of Modern Requirements. In addition, you have got Modern Requirements within the context menu of the backlog and the query view, and so on. But today we are going to focus on diagramming. So when you create diagrams, you can create diagrams of different types. You can create a swim lane diagram, with both horizontal lanes and you can have these separators to show different phases within it. You can create things like context diagram where you're sort of saying, hey, this is the booking operation, and then here are the other systems we work with, and there are different entities that we are connected to. Sort of sets a high level picture of what's happening. And then you've got things like activity diagrams. I'll collapse the left side. So you've got activity diagrams. Here's a forgot password activity diagram. Here's a login diagram. And in this diagram, not only have I drawn the activity diagram, but against this shape, I've also, you'll see there's a D here. That means you can drill down on it to another diagram. So if I edit on this, this will then navigate to forgot password diagram, right? So the idea is that you can actually create multi-tiered processes that refer to each other, either going down, or you can even sort of refer backwards, as in when I go to forgot password, in forgot password, I actually have a loop back to the login screen so that it can go back to the login screen. Okay, so the ability to sort of define sub processes and then jump off to that is a useful one, because at some point in time, your diagrams, if they become very big, it's not only harder to understand, but it is much harder to manage as well. So obviously you want to contain the scope of how big a diagram ought to be. So before we get into more details with this, let's create a new diagram. So you basically go new, you can create folders and organize your diagrams in it, but we'll just go create a new diagram. So let's do a user authentication process, and you can choose, if you want to choose a stencil here, it'll just open it up by default, or you can go with blank. Obviously, there are various types of stencils there, your basic flow charts and BPMN and cross-functional for swim lane and data flow you have, and then you have various UML artifacts as well, or UML stencils as well. I'll just start with the blank because it will just require one extra click to get to the right stencil. So if I do want to work on BPMN, I'll just go there and look at it. Otherwise, I'll look at flow charting and do that there, and so on. Working with swim lane is obviously a common thing to do. So I want to show you a couple of important points in here. So one is when you drag and drop the swim lane in here, and you want to add another lane to it, you can actually bring it up here. Like if I drop it here, it'll just become a separate swim lane. So you have two different swim lanes in here. So I didn't want to do that. What I want to do is I want to have it connected. So when you hover over this, you'll see there's a red line that shows up. And if you drop it, it'll get connected. Similarly, if I want to add another one, based on as I move this, you can see the red line is moving. And wherever you drop it, it'll add a new line. It'll add the lane that's connected, right? So that's one technique to remember. The other is that, of course, I can add my lines here, and then I can call my phases whatever I want to. When I'm working within a lane, I can resize my lanes, like so. And so let's go ahead and sort of write down some name here. User authentication. And then what we'll do is we'll basically select this and go into its properties and say that the font I want is white and I want it to be larger. Okay. So you can do that, and similarly, you can click on phase, you can double click it or just go to the property here, and you can say setup, and for this one, we can call it execute. Right, so we'll set it up and we'll execute something, and so these are the two different lanes, sort of vertical lanes within the horizontal lanes that I've created. And then similarly, I can go here and I can sort of define the different roles. So this is the customer, this is the this is say admin, and so on and so forth. And again, you can set up its properties through the properties window. Like so, and there are other properties here as well. Okay, and then of course, when you want to drag and drop your things into it, then you basically go to the stencil you want to work with, and you can simply drag and drop your things, your shapes into it, write what you need to, and drop the next thing. You will see that when I drop something, so as long as I have this shape connected and I drop something here, it actually automatically links it. Okay. So if the previous shape is connected and you simply drag and drop things, it will automatically link these various things for you. Or the other thing you can do is that, let's say it's not connected, and I drag and drop this thing here, and now I want to connect it. Then I simply select this, drag this arrow onto this, and the two are connected. Okay. The other way you can do that is, again, let's not select something, put this here. I can click on the arrow, just click on it, don't drag it, and then you can simply connect the specific node you want to connect to, right? So just click on the arrow and then you can link things. So I could click on this, just do that there. Okay. Now you'll note that this time what I did was I actually, so let me show you this again. So this time what I did was I actually didn't drag the connector, but I just put the cursor in it and dragged and dropped it into the other one. Then it just sort of does it. It auto selects the connector. But if you do want to be specific, then just drag and drop the connector to any of the other connection points. The other thing is that if you wanted to change the background color, then we can, like so. So again, that's just your background color. Or you want to change the thickness of the line or whatever you have. So again, these properties can be used for that. Yeah, and if you did want to delete a connector, you can just select it, hit the delete button on your keyboard, or you can just delete it this way. Okay. The same thing goes for the shapes. You can select it and click delete, or just click on the X, and that will be deleted. So that's essentially how you create a diagram, but of course it depends on the stencil you're using. They have slightly different behavior, but generally it is the same thing. It works in many respects similar to how Visio might work. If you wanted to simply take this and get rid of it, then use Control A, and then you can delete the whole thing, and now the whole thing is gone. Okay. Now, if I were to create an activity diagram, like so. and so on and so forth, then you're just again dragging, dropping, and doing the needful in creating the diagram. The one other thing you're doing is you can add annotation to this. So I could go and I could say, you know what, this is step 1. This is step 2, and so on and so forth, right? You can also just add a note in there. And so these are the sort of standard annotation you can add to it. The one thing that you'll see is that depending again the type of diagram stencil you're using, you'll obviously have different types of shapes that are available to model what you need to. Within the UML activity, you also have the vertical swim lane. Again, works the same way as the other one I showed you, and so on. There is also sort of an icon library that you can use, and you could use this as jump off point to other places and so on. So there is an icon library that's available to you. You also have the object modeler, where you can actually define the objects and add attributes to it and link the objects and so on. So this is more of a business object modeling stencil. All right, so that's your basic diagrams. Now, one thing to note about diagrams, when you are working on a diagram, you can save it, and saving is just that you've saved the file, but it doesn't mean that others can work on it. So if you remember, in Smart Doc, there was no saving or checkout, because the way we built Smart Docs was we envisioned that multiple people could work on it at the same time. Obviously, diagram is not that type of an artifact. In diagramming, people tend to work on their own, so only one person can work on it. So the mechanism in diagram is to support check in and check out. So when I'm done with it, I'll check it in, and at this point, somebody else can be working on the diagram. So if somebody else opens the diagram, they'll see this yellow bar that says they're viewing it in read only, but they can edit it. Now, if I click on edit, it checks it out. I can work on it, and then eventually, when I'm done with it, I can check it in again. If somebody else opens up this diagram now, they'll see a message that Asif is working on this diagram. So come back later if you want to edit it. However, they can see the last checked in version of that diagram. Now, against diagrams, you can also have discussion. So you could go here and you can say, something useful, and you can add your comments to it. You can also refer to work items with this. So you can just simply reference certain work items like so, or you can even do mentions, as in saying, Asif, please do well in the webinar. There you go, right? So, so here you have a discussion that you can do on the diagram, and of course, if you click on this hyperlink, it'll open up the work item. If you click on the person, then I can initiate an email to that person, and so on and so forth. By the way, if you click on this little icon, which says annotation on and off, so if you do want to hide it, just click on it, then you don't see the clutter around it. You're seeing a clean diagram, but you can always enable it and see that again. There are certain sort of basic functionality here. The other thing that you can do is if you multi-select. So you could go and sort of select multiple fields or multiple shapes rather at once, and then you can group them or ungroup them. So if you group it, then the whole thing moves together, or you can delete it together also without having to multi-select. You can also align it. So you could say, hey, I want to align this somehow, right? So it's bottom aligned now, or I could do middle alignment, and so on and so forth. So multi-select, and then you get the options for alignment. So that's the basic menu. I'm going to check this in, and then we'll get into something very interesting. So let's go take a look at the login screen again. So here, so fine. I mean, if you have used a diagramming tool like most of you have, this is another diagramming tool. So why use the modern requirements diagramming? So one obvious reason to do that is because this artifact now becomes part of your project. Okay. So instead of managing your artifacts, a Visio file in SharePoint or your local drive, your requirements in ADO, and then all the different artifacts distributed, you can now manage all the artifacts directly within Azure DevOps, right? So that's one basic reason to use this approach. Then people are not chasing each other to find where the artifacts are, trying to put it all together. Since it's all together, it's a useful idea not to have distributed knowledge, but a single source of truth or a system of record. So that's one. The other is my favorite. So consider this, that you have a diagram here. Okay. So what people do inevitably today, in the best case scenario, is that they'll create a diagram, say in Visio, or some other tool, but they create a diagram. And the diagram defines a business process or an activity flow. And then what they do is they then go and they say, let me now define my requirements. Because the diagram tells you a picture, but you still have to specify a lot of details. So people go define the requirements. And of course, there's a lot in the diagram that inspires that requirement. But they do it in, say, Word or in ADO, but the diagram has sort of the initial context or the details that that person is being inspired by. Of course, in worst case scenario, the diagram is completely discarded, other than a 10-minute look at it so that you get an understanding at a high level. And then you get into creating your requirements. And then you define the scenarios. You define how do flows work? How do things come together? Because that's part of the requirement. And some people define those as scenarios, others define it as use cases. And then finally, people define test cases. And again, somebody else is doing that. So somebody does diagramming. Often somebody else will do the requirements and test cases, and yet somebody else is going to do the test cases, right? So you have 3 or 4 different actors involved in this play, and they're trying to tell a consistent message of what needs to be done. And what I'm going to suggest is that in a somewhat of a complex environment, that approach is bound to have a lot of problems, because it is not possible to tell a consistent story when different people are creating knowledge in a disconnected environment. So that brings me to, how do we solve that problem? So one thing you can do is you can go to your diagram and go to your link tab, and you can see that against this activity, or this activity, I've actually created a business rule, or you can create any requirement that you want to against it. And so against different activities, I do have different requirements. And in fact, I can, if I click this icon, this will tell me I have work items against these 4 activities. So what I'm doing in this case is I'm actually using the diagram as a trampoline to identify my requirements. The next thing you can do, so in this case, you solve the first problem, that the requirements are not created independently, but literally on top of the diagram. The second problem is that you might say, Asif, not individual activities are linked to a work item, but rather some process or some scenario in it, like this scenario, is the requirement. It's not something by itself, but it's something, things coming together. I call that the integration story. This is how things come together. And what you can then do is you can actually go to the analysis tab. And in the analysis tab, the system will detect the different scenarios. And you can publish those scenarios. And when you publish the scenario, 2 things will happen. One is the text from the flow becomes part of the description, and the image gets embedded within the description as well. And the work items that were linked to the shapes in that path also get linked to this integration story. So this macro user story or scenario-based story is linked to the lower level. In this case, actually, is linked to business rules, but it could be linked to whatever work items that were linked to that shape. So it could be user stories or sub-stories that it's linked to. So likewise, you can define all your different user stories, which is really the different scenarios within your flow, and again link the relevant lower level work items that are used in that flow to it. So that was the second thing. Based on the diagram, we created the requirements, and based on the diagram, we have now defined integration stories or scenarios. And then finally, what we'll do is we'll define our test cases. So the system has found that there are actually 4 different test cases here. This particular test case is going through the failed attempt before it goes through the locked scenario. So here I could say login failed, followed by account locked. And then I can simply publish it. And a new test case is now created based on the name I just gave it. But here are all my steps in it. Here are the requirements or rules that are being covered by that particular test case. And in the summary, you have the visual that shows you what was the thinking behind that test case. So if you are a business analyst or a product owner, you might do this and provide this to either the testers. They'll love you for it, because guess what the tester has to do? The tester, often if you don't create a diagram, has to envision the flow and through some mental gymnastics, come up with all the scenarios. It's not a trivial exercise. And this one is a simple flow. Take a somewhat complex flow, you might have 10, 15, 20 different test cases. How predictable is the outcome going to be when somebody is doing this mentally. So unless they draw the diagram and then they sort of identify the flaws that have to be tested, then they have a better shot at getting it right. But modern requirements will help you identify the scenarios. We'll show it through the visuals, or you can say, show me what the steps were. And then you can name it and publish it as a test case. So again, going back to the more complex scenario, where you had a complex process and you were doing all of this manually. Now when you do it with modern requirements, it is not only more complete and consistent in what the artifact you're creating from it, but it also is much more faster. It's much more efficient to do it this way and have some confidence that you're covering all the things that you need to. So that's the second big reason why you should consider using the model requirements diagramming tool within your projects. So let's check this in, and what we'll do is we'll actually go to the forgot password scenario, and I'll click edit here, and we will do a few things. So what I want to do is I want to create a user story against the whole flow. This is the forgot password process. So because that exists, I want to now create a user story that says, as a user, I can reset my password so that blah, blah, blah. Okay. So now I've created a user story against the diagram as a whole. If a user story already existed, I could simply link the diagram to an existing story. I could also break the link between the diagram and this user story. The other thing we can do here is when we go to the analysis tab and the system identifies the different stories. Oh, by the way, this is a good example here. This shows this connector in red, because I was thinking, why didn't it go start from there? The red one says the connection, the endpoints are not connected to the shape. Now, of course, visually it's hard to tell, but if I do this, and I just do that, then you can see that is gone. So this is not red anymore. So if you see it in red, that just means the endpoints are not connected to the shapes. So now we can see I've got one scenario which basically is going to go through the login process they provide the email address, but then will fail, right? So this is my forgot password with wrong email address. And then I can choose what work item do I want to publish based on this scenario. I would use a story in this project, and then click on publish, and it will create my user story with the steps in it, the visual, any requirements that might be linked to it would be linked to it. And likewise, I can click the second one and give it a name and republish it. Alternatively, I can go to the use case area, and this time I'm not going to create two stories, but I'll create a single artifact for use case. So I'll say forgot password use case, and the first one is called wrong email. The second one is called reset successful, and I'm going to publish it to a use case work item. Okay. And then I simply go and click publish, and it will create a single work item for me where it says my forgot password use case. Here's my primary, here's my secondary, and here's the visual to it. Okay. The one thing is that obviously this one is actually the primary, and that's the alternate, right? So I can then republish it again. And this time it'll tell me, are you sure you want to override the previous one? I do. And then it will override it. And now I've got the right, wrong email is my alternate, not my primary. And then finally, we can do the same thing with test cases. It's found 2 test cases. But you'll note in the second one, it actually goes through this flow. So it gives you give it the wrong email address for reset password before you actually go through the success path. Okay. So in this case, in a test case, the logic is that it will go find from every starting point pathways to every ending point. Okay? It doesn't stop in between. Scenarios don't loop. They stop if that point has occurred previously. So if I go here, you can see in the scenario, this stopped back here. It didn't continue through, because otherwise you'd have too many recorded scenarios. So I think from a scenario point of view, you just want to make sure it comes here, this works, and then the second scenario works. But in your test case, what you want to make sure is that not only are you going through here, but actually will successfully complete the happy path. So of course, what you now do is you give it a name and you say this is wrong email followed by success. And then you can publish your test case. And that's your test case here. Now, of course, many of you might be using Azure DevOps for testing. In fact, we have seen over the last 2-3 years, the popularity of Azure DevOps testing has skyrocketed as Microsoft has made it a very solid offering for your test management and test execution and automation and so on and so forth. So you'll find that once you publish your test cases, your testers, of course, some people have their testers do this because the testers decide which scenarios should be published for test cases, and then they'll manually tweak it and change it as they need to. But the idea is you want to give it a jump start, either for your testers or for your UAT. All right, so that's the diagramming from this view. But if you use, as I mentioned in my Smart Docs webinar a month ago, that within Smart Docs, you can also have diagrams directly embedded within your documents. So if you take a look at this document, here is a diagram that is embedded within the Smart Doc. Okay. So how do you embed the diagram in a Smart Doc? Well, there's a prerequisite that if you have a meta template for your document, then the meta template of a Smart Doc must permit the diagram to appear in it. And in that case, the work item type you're selecting is the first one, model diagram. Okay, not a diagram work item. There is a diagram work item in here. That's not it. You want to choose model diagram, and this will let you actually embed a full diagram, like having Visio in Word. Okay, so that's one. The other thing is that if I go to the outline view, what I can do is I can say in here that I want to create a diagram. So I can say some diagram, and this I'll then reposition it elsewhere. And with this, if I double click on this in Smart Docs, it will actually open up the diagram editor where I can actually create my diagrams directly within Smart Docs. Okay. So now I can go ahead and I can create my my diagrams however I choose to, and so on and so forth. Which then, if I simply get out, oh, by the way, in here, you can still do your analysis, and you can still do other things like create work items against your shapes and so on and so forth, right? But the idea is that the main idea was that you could create a diagram in here. You can now, once I've created some diagram, you can go to the diagram hub and still find this diagram. It's referencing the same diagram artifact. So you can either flush it out here or you can do it there. But now this diagram is embedded in here. So you can see the diagram is right there. And alternatively, you can also insert, click on insert, look for a diagram. So let's say I had a diagram for forgot password. So I could search for this. And then I can say, hey, you know what, let me bring in my forgot password in there. Right? So now we have added our forgot password in there. So within SmartDoc, you can either bring in existing diagrams, you can create new diagrams directly from here and do what you need to. So that's having diagrams within Smart Docs. So with that, that's really the bulk of what I wanted to share with you today. So yeah, so let's open it up for Q&A, and we'll take your questions and then continue with answering them as long as there are questions. Obviously, when you need to run, thank you for attending, but we will take all the questions that we get and answer as many as we can.
Okay, thank you, Asif. So we have a number of questions, some of which were answered as you were speaking. One question that was repeated quite a number of times is, can I import Visio into modern requirements? So I answered it a couple of times, but it's probably good to say it to the audience.
Yeah, so you cannot bring in Visio into modern requirements. However, what we did was something better. The problem with bringing Visio into MR is Visio does a lot of things, and there's a lot of there's a lot of sort of complexity in Visio that if you bring it in, then you would want it out, and you want to maintain that complexity going back and forth, and that's just not efficient. It will not work well. So what we did was we actually created a product called Smart Visio. Smart Visio is actually an extension to Visio itself. And so you can actually do all the things I showed you in diagramming, but you can do it directly in Visio. So you connect the Visio diagram to your ADO project and define your requirements, define your scenarios, define your test cases, all within Visio.
So the next question is, can you copy a diagram from one project to another?
You cannot copy it across projects, but what you can do is you can make a copy of it within the same project and then make alterations to it. We do have that requirement in our backlog for all MR artifacts, whether it's a diagram or a smart doc or whatever. You can copy it, that you should be able to copy it to another project. So that is something I think you will see come out in the next 2-3 releases.
There was a question about inserting a diagram from another tool like Star Uml, which is, I guess, related to the Visio answer. Can you address that question?
Yeah. So in our backlog currently, we have the requirement to import from Visio, but again, I said that requirement is not as high priority for us to import from Visio because we have a Visio extension in there. So if you're using some other tool, either you'll have to take a screenshot of that and copy and paste it into a smart doc or wherever you need to, but we don't have any plans currently of supporting other tools as a extension in the near future. So Visio we do support, web-based we do support, but with other solutions you have to take a screenshot and bring it in.
The next question is, can I link one diagram to another, including sub-diagrams?
Yes, absolutely. In this particular case where I have forgot password, I can have this point to, and is pointed to, another diagram. When I click on this, it simply jumps to the forgot password area. And just to show you how that is done, so let's say that I have some activity that I want to drill down on. So you basically go here and you say, I want to add a diagram for that node or a mock-up or a use case against it, but let's say a diagram, at which point I can just give it a name, new diagram 1, or you can select an existing one. Actually, let's select an existing one where I can go, okay, purchasing workflow should be linked to it. So now this shape is actually linked to purchase processing workflow. And so if I drill down on it, it'll take me to the purchase processing workflow. In the event that you actually choose to give it a new name, then what it will do is it'll create a new diagram, which you will see on the left side, and it will link this shape to that new diagram.
So the next question is about structural diagrams as opposed to process-based diagrams, thinking about architectural diagrams in particular.
Yeah, so it really depends on what stencil you need to use. Obviously, if you're trying to draw some sort of a block diagram, you can do it with flowcharting stencil. So it does depend on what type of diagram, what stencil you need to do that. We are adding a sequence diagram to our stencils, and I think it's going to be out in our next release. So it depends on what stencils you need, and we are adding more stencils to the diagramming as we get feedback from our clients.
There was a question early on about the whiteboarding capability, I'm assuming relating to our SmartNote module. because that's related to diagrams. And there was a question whether we could talk about the whiteboarding capability as part of the Q&A.
Yeah, you know what? I think we will cover that. I mean, obviously we've got videos on our website under Help Center, both as tutorials or bootcamp, and now deep dive. So I don't think we want to get into that because that will take a little longer to do. But we will make sure that one of our deep dives do get into a lot more detail about it if what's on our website is not sufficient.
Okay. So there was another question here. So I just use a flowchart diagram to indicate an information model or architectural diagram. Is that correct?
No, could you come again, Bob?
So the question is, I just use a flowchart diagram to indicate an information model or architecture diagram.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on what stencil you need. You can also use shapes from multiple stencil. If you need a particular stencil and in shape, and that's not in this area, so I build this diagram with this stencil. But you might go in BPMN and say, hey, you know what? I really like this type of shape here for sub-process. So you can mix and match your shapes across stencils as well. And of course, for information architecture, the business object model could also be very interesting.
Here's a long question. Can you create actors within modern requirements and relate them to work items? Actors, for example, could be different business roles.
Mm-hmm. So yes, so there is a stencil with a sort of a stick figure kind of actor icon in here, and you could create work items against that actor, and whether it's linked to. So you could create an actor work item against that shape. So let's say this is the customer. So now the customer is linked to this work item called customer, and you can link requirements to that actor. And yeah. And by the way, you'll see these types of work items. These are not standard work items in Azure DevOps, but it's really part of our process template that we have created. So this is a hybrid template with things like business case and change control, or actors and so on and so forth, or business rules. And so this is a very sort of much richer process template than the standard Agile template. So this is the BA Bach Agile template that we've created. So you're welcome to ask for it if you don't already have it. We can certainly send you the details for it.
So there's a follow-on question. Does it pick up the actor from the swim lane when creating a use case or test case?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. So you would have to, like you will see, depending on how I did this, I said, you know what, the user is doing this, the system is doing that. So I am being more explicit in my diagram as to where the data is coming from when we create the, so you do want to make it more explicit, because our logic for the diagramming works across all the stencils. So you can use any of the stencils, actually, except for business object model, because that doesn't really auto-generating scenarios and use cases, test cases don't apply to it, but for most others it does. So instead of giving you just one way of doing it and then sort of using that logic, we have sort of implemented it generically, so you can use any type of process and still be able to get that type of test cases and other artifacts from it.
Here's a good question. What happens to the requirement links when the flow changes?
So that's a really good question. So what happens is that, so if I've added a couple of shapes in here, it doesn't matter, right? And even if I link this to that, it still doesn't matter. If the work item is linked to a given shape, then that link will always remain. Okay, so changing the flow or whatever doesn't affect the fact that it is linked to a particular shape. However, if you delete the shape, the work item still is in ADO. It doesn't delete the work item. It's just you've decided that's not relevant from the screen point of view, so it's still there. Now, if you were to go to the analysis tab, and you can now see that I've got different scenarios, and one of the scenarios is detected as this now. So it identified that there's a new scenario in there, all right? So that's one. The other is, what if you change one of the shapes? Like if I break the flow, so this flow is now broken. Now what happens in the analysis, it'll tell you these two scenarios don't exist anymore. So if I go open up this scenario, you will see that this scenario was like this, and that's not valid anymore. Or this one is not valid anymore. So it's telling us what scenarios actually broke. So I broke that line, that shape, so that scenario is not valid anymore. So it doesn't remove it. It tells you what you did, now this is not valid. So you could go and change the state to, say, removed, so that that's not applicable here anymore. So you could do that and then remove it from here if you like to. So it will identify when scenarios are not valid or new scenarios are created. But let's say that you have simply updated the text in this flow. You've just updated the text. In that case, all you have to do is republish it. And when you republish it, then that user story will get updated.
So there's a general question here. Where can I find more examples of modern requirements capabilities? And the short answer is on our website. We have lots of information and videos. And if you go to the Help Center tab on our website, we have bootcamp videos, tutorial videos, and copies of the deep dive webinars that we're doing. So you'll see them all there.
Yeah, it's right up here. It's a Help Center. And once you click on Help Center, you'll drill down into it with a lot more information, either as bootcamp videos, these are short ones, tutorials, these are mid-sized ones, and our deep dive. Now we've had two, the third one we'll get in here, and so on and so forth. And these obviously are an hour long. So different levels of contents are available. But of course, if you just want sort of high-level marketing information, then certainly the rest of our website has a lot of sort of high-level capability that it lists as to what we do and so on and so forth. So there's all types of information available on our website.
There's another question here, and we love all of these questions that people are asking, so thank you very much. Can I see if a requirement is not connected to a workflow item?
Can I see if a work item is not connected to a workflow item? So the answer right now is no. The good news is that we are actually working on that. And how we are working on that, because we've already solved that problem in a few places, and we are going to do this for diagrams, mockups, and use cases shortly. And that is that if you go to any work item and you are looking at the sort of the work item window, we have a function point called linked artifacts, which you can call from any work item. And what it does is it'll tell you where that work item is being used. And today, we are only showing where an artifact is being used in a baseline, a smart doc, or review. So those are the three areas this covers now. In our next release, I believe we are implementing it for diagrams, mockups, and use cases as well. So that's going to give you, given a work item, everywhere that it's being used. And then, of course, you just click on the smart doc or baseline review in soon diagrams, and it'll take you to that particular artifact.
So I think that covers all of the questions that we have received so far. Again, thank you very much for providing the questions, and I'll turn it over to Asif to summarize and conclude.
All right, folks. So hopefully you can see the power of diagramming within modern requirements. Not only will you have all your artifacts in one place, such as having a diagram be part of your project and not a distinct artifact, but also the intelligence of one, being able to create work items against the shapes, two, of auto-detecting scenarios, use cases, and test cases, and being able to not only produce better quality, but do it faster, right? So that's really the message around diagramming. Our last webinar, not our last, our next webinar rather, because we are going to have probably 10 different webinars. This is a third one. The next one is on requirements reuse. And we'll be taking a look at various different aspects of reuse and the pros and the cons, and really how do you manage knowledge. And that's going to be our next webinar in 2 weeks' time. And you'll be getting an email through which you can register. And of course, on our homepage, also the website, we'll have our next webinar registration link. So with that, I wish you all happy Wednesday, and stay safe, and hopefully we'll speak real soon. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.